The crash. Jack Stanton adjusted his visor and leaned forward in his cockpit. The vast, dark expanse of the alien desert stretched out below, illuminated only by the twin moons. He was a scavenger, used to finding scraps of metal, abandoned ships, and forgotten treasures on desolate planets. But tonight was different. A bright streak tore across the sky, painting the heavens with fire. It wasn't a meteor. It moved too deliberately. Jack squinted as the object hurtled downward, shaking the ground with a deafening crash. Smoke and sparks erupted from the impact site, just a few miles from his position. "Now that's something you don't see every day," Jack muttered, flipping switches to power up his small, battered ship. Curiosity tugged at him like a magnet. He knew it could be dangerous, but the thought of valuable tech was too tempting. Scavenging wasn't just his job, it was his survival. As he approached the crash site, the wreckage came into view. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its sleek, curved design glowed faintly, even as it lay in pieces. Strange symbols marked its surface, shimmering in colors that seemed to shift with the light. Jack grabbed his plasma torch and stepped out cautiously. The air was thick with smoke, and the faint hum of energy from the wreckage buzzed in his ears. As he crept closer, he noticed movement, a faint, flickering shadow inside the broken cockpit. "Hello," Jack called out, his voice echoing in the quiet night. A figure emerged, stumbling from the wreckage. It was a girl. No, an alien. Her silvery skin reflected the moonlight, and her eyes glowed a soft blue. She clutched her side, her breathing shallow, and a faint trail of blood-like fluid stained her long, flowing garment. Around her neck hung a glowing necklace that pulsed like a heartbeat. Jack froze. He had seen many strange creatures in his travels, but this was different. She was clearly intelligent, but she looked terrified. "It's okay," he said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I won't hurt you." The alien girl tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to understand him. She took a shaky step forward and pointed back at the wreckage, speaking in a soft, melodic language Jack didn't understand. Her voice was filled with urgency. "What are you trying to say?" Jack asked, glancing at the wreckage. That's when he saw it, a faint glow deep within the ship's ruins. Whatever it was, she wanted it. Before he could think twice, Jack moved toward the wreckage. The ship groaned under its own weight, sparks flying as he climbed inside. The heat was intense, and the air smelled of burning metal. Following the glow, he found a small crystalline device lodged in the ship's core. It pulsed in sync with the alien girl's necklace. "This thing," he called out, holding it up. She nodded frantically, waving for him to hurry. As Jack climbed out of the wreckage, the ship began to rumble. A warning light on his wrist scanner blinked red. "Great, it's about to blow," he muttered, picking up his pace. The alien girl staggered forward, but she was too weak to move quickly. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed her around the waist and hoisted her over his shoulder. She was surprisingly light, her silvery skin cool to the touch. With the glowing device clutched tightly in one hand and the girl over his shoulder, Jack sprinted away from the crash site. Behind him, the ship erupted in a fiery explosion, sending shockwaves through the desert. The force threw him to the ground, but he shielded the girl as best he could. When the dust settled, Jack sat up, coughing. The alien girl stirred in his arms, her glowing necklace dimming slightly. She looked at him, her expression softening as if to say thank you. Jack nodded, even though he wasn't sure she understood. "You're welcome," he said, helping her to her feet. "Now let's figure out what this thing is before it gets us both killed." But before he could take another step, a chilling sound echoed across the desert, a low hum, followed by the whir of engines. Jack turned to see dark silhouettes in the sky, descending rapidly. It wasn't rescue. It was trouble. The alien girl's eyes widened, and she gripped his arm tightly. Jack didn't need a translator to understand what she meant. They had to run. "Why do I always get myself into these messes?" he muttered, taking off into the night with the girl by his side. In the distance, the mysterious ships closed in, their intentions clear. Jack tightened his grip on the glowing device and glanced at the girl. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The hunt begins. The desert was silent, except for the crunch of Jack's boots against the sand. The alien girl clung to his arm, her glowing necklace dimming and brightening in an uneven rhythm. It felt as though the artifact in his hand pulsed in sync, like they were two pieces of the same puzzle. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the horizon. The mysterious ships were gone, but Jack knew better than to believe they had given up. Whoever was after them would not stop easily. The girl's grip tightened, her silvery fingers trembling. "It's okay," Jack said, though he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. "We'll find somewhere to hide." But where? The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. His ship was parked miles back, and they couldn't go back, not without leading their pursuers straight to it. The girl tugged at his sleeve, pointing toward the jagged cliffs rising in the distance. Her glowing eyes seemed to plead. "Cliffs?" Jack frowned. "That's your plan. Fine, better than standing here." The trek was grueling. The desert heat beat down on them, and Jack could feel the sweat soaking into his shirt. The girl stumbled more than once, her strength clearly fading. Each time, Jack caught her and urged her forward. "Stay with me," he said. "Whoever those guys were, they're not here for a friendly chat." When they finally reached the cliffs, Jack spotted a narrow crevice in the rock face. It wasn't much, but it would provide cover. He helped the girl inside and crouched down, his back pressed against the stone. The air was cooler here, and the shade was a small relief. The girl leaned heavily against the wall, her glowing necklace now faint. Jack pulled a canteen from his belt and offered it to her. She hesitated, staring at the water as if she'd never seen it before. "Go on," Jack urged. "It's just water. Won't kill you." She took a tentative sip, then more eagerly drank, her energy visibly returning. For the first time, she met his eyes and spoke a single word in her melodic language. It sounded like Karen. "Karen," Jack repeated. She nodded, then pointed at herself. "Oh, that's your name." She smiled faintly and nodded again. Then she gestured at him, tilting her head in curiosity. "Me? Jack Stanton," he said, tapping his chest. "Scavenger, occasional hero, and apparently, your new bodyguard." Karen gave a small laugh, a sound like chimes in the wind. Jack found himself smiling despite the situation. The moment of peace didn't last. A faint hum reached his ears, growing louder. Jack's heart sank. He peeked out of the crevice and spotted 3 sleek, black drones scanning the area. They hovered low, their red sensors sweeping the ground like hunting animals. "Damn it," he muttered. He ducked back into the shadows and looked at Karen. "They're tracking us. Your necklace. Can they trace it?" She frowned, clutching the glowing pendant protectively. Then she shook her head, gesturing toward the artifact Jack carried. She pointed at it, then at the drones, her expression grave. "This thing," Jack whispered, holding up the crystal. "They're after this." Karen nodded, her glowing eyes filled with urgency. She reached for the crystal, pressing her fingers to its surface. Symbols lit up on its surface, shifting and changing like living writing. Jack stared, mesmerized, until the sound of the drones snapped him back to reality. Okay, he said. "I get it. It's important, but we can't let them catch us." He peeked out again. The drones were closer now, their red sensors scanning the cliffside. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't fight them. He was outgunned and outmatched. Running was the only option. "Stay close," he whispered to Karen. "We're gonna make a break for it." She nodded, her fear replaced by determination. Jack took a deep breath, then bolted from the crevice, pulling her along. The drones immediately picked up their movement, emitting sharp, high-pitched alarms. "Great, now we got their attention," Jack shouted, weaving between rocks as the drones fired bursts of energy at their feet. Sand exploded around them, and the heat of the blasts singed the air. Karin stumbled, nearly falling, but Jack caught her arm and kept her moving. Ahead, he spotted a narrow canyon cutting through the cliffs. If they could reach it, they might lose the drones in the maze of rock. Almost there, he yelled, dragging her forward. The drones closed in, their weapons charging for another volley. Jack felt the heat of a shot graze his shoulder and bit back a curse. They dove into the canyon just as the drones fired again. The blasts hit the rock walls, sending shards of stone raining down. Jack shielded Karin as they pressed on, the walls growing tighter around them. The drones hesitated, their bulk too large to follow easily. "Ha, got you now," Jack muttered, skidding to a stop in a small, hidden alcove. He pulled Karin down beside him, both of them breathing hard. For now, the drones were out of sight, their hum fading. Jack leaned back against the cool rock, his heart pounding. Karin looked at him, her glowing eyes softening. She touched her necklace and then gestured toward the crystal in his hand. Slowly, she brought her hands together, as if uniting two halves of a whole. Jack stared at her, his mind racing. "This isn't just a random artifact, is it?" he asked. "It's connected to you, and it's why they're hunting you." Karin nodded, her expression grim. Then she said something that sent a chill down Jack's spine. Though he didn't understand her words, her meaning was clear. They weren't safe. This was just the beginning. The jungle of secrets. The canyon walls gave way to a dense jungle, a surprising contrast to the arid desert they'd left behind. Massive trees with glowing bioluminescent vines towered over Jack and Karin, their canopy casting a faint greenish light. The air here was humid and thick, filled with the distant calls of unseen creatures. Jack had never seen anything like it, and for a moment, he almost forgot about the danger they were in. Almost. Behind them, the faint hum of drones still echoed. Though the tight canyon had slowed their pursuers, Jack knew it wouldn't be long before they caught up. He glanced at Karin, who was struggling to keep up. Her silvery skin shimmered with sweat, and she leaned heavily on him for support. "You holding up?" he asked, his voice low. Karin nodded weakly but said nothing. Her glowing necklace flickered dimly, its usual steady pulse faltering. Jack sighed. "We need to find a place to rest. Somewhere they won't find us." Karin suddenly stopped, her glowing eyes scanning the jungle. She tilted her head, listening intently. Then she pointed toward a thick cluster of vines hanging over a massive tree trunk. "You see something?" Jack asked, following her gaze. Karin didn't answer. Instead, she tugged his arm, urging him forward. As they approached the tree, Jack noticed markings etched into its bark, strange, swirling patterns that looked almost like writing. Karin touched the tree gently, her fingers tracing the symbols. The vines reacted instantly, pulling back to reveal a hidden opening in the trunk. Jack raised an eyebrow. "A secret door. What kind of jungle is this?" Karin gave him a faint smile and gestured for him to follow. Reluctantly, Jack stepped inside. The interior of the tree was a vast hollow chamber, lit by glowing crystals embedded in the walls. Strange artifacts and tools lined shelves carved directly into the wood. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it sat a small, pulsating orb that emitted a soft hum. Jack whistled. "Well, this is unexpected." Karin moved to the pedestal, her movements purposeful. She placed her glowing necklace near the orb, and the two objects seemed to resonate with each other, their lights synchronizing. Symbols appeared on the walls, shifting and rearranging themselves into what looked like a map. "Wait a second," Jack said, stepping closer. "Is that a star map?" Karin nodded, her expression serious. She pointed to one of the glowing points on the map, then to herself. Jack frowned, trying to piece it together. "That's your home, isn't it?" he asked. "This map leads there." Karin nodded again, then pointed to another section of the map where the symbols glowed red. She looked at Jack, her face tense, and mimicked an explosion with her hands. Jack's stomach sank. "Let me guess. The bad guys? They're heading there too." Karen's solemn nod confirmed his fears. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up. "Great. So not only do we have bounty hunters on our tail, but they're also about to destroy your home." "Fantastic." Before Karen could respond, the hum of drones grew louder. Jack's eyes widened as shadows passed over the opening of the tree. He pulled Karen down, crouching behind the pedestal. "Looks like they found us," he whispered. "Got any more secret doors in here?" Karen shook her head and motioned for him to wait. She pressed her necklace to the pedestal, and the orb began to glow brighter. A low vibration filled the chamber, and the symbols on the walls shifted again, forming what looked like a series of instructions. Jack's wrist scanner beeped, its screen lighting up with unfamiliar data. He stared at it, confused. What the? Did it just download something? Karen pointed at the scanner, then to the map. She mimicked a flying motion with her hand, her expression urgent. "You're telling me this thing has the coordinates we need to get to your planet?" Jack asked, his heart racing. Karen nodded. The drones outside began firing, their energy blasts shaking the tree. Jack gritted his teeth. "Okay, we got the map. Now how do we get out of here alive?" Karen pressed a hidden panel on the pedestal, and part of the wall slid open to reveal a narrow tunnel. She gestured for Jack to follow, her expression determined. "Lead the way," Jack said, grabbing the crystal artifact and his scanner. Together, they slipped into the tunnel just as the drones breached the tree. The tunnel was dark and narrow, twisting and turning like a labyrinth. The sound of the drones grew fainter, but Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they found the entrance. He focused on keeping up with Karen, who moved with surprising speed despite her earlier exhaustion. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up into another part of the jungle. They emerged near a small stream, the sound of rushing water masking any distant noises. Jack collapsed onto a rock, panting. "Okay, that was too close. What's next?" "More running." Karen knelt beside the stream, cupping the water in her hands and drinking deeply. She then looked at Jack and pointed to the scanner on his wrist. Her eyes filled with determination. Jack stared at the glowing coordinates on the screen. "You really think we can get to your planet before they do?" Karen nodded, her expression fierce. Jack sighed and stood up, his body aching, but his resolve solidifying. "All right," he said. "Let's do this. But I'm telling you now, this better be worth it." As they began their trek through the jungle, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes followed their every move. He tightened his grip on the crystal and muttered to himself, "This just keeps getting better." The jungle whispered around them, as if the very trees held secrets. Whatever lay ahead, Jack knew there was no turning back now. A galactic chase. The jungle buzzed with life as Jack and Karen pushed forward. The faint light from her necklace provided a soft glow in the dense shadows of the towering trees. Jack's wrist scanner continued to blink with the coordinates they had downloaded, the only guide to their destination. But the peace didn't last long. A high-pitched whir sliced through the air, a sound Jack had come to dread. Drones. Lots of them. He glanced up and spotted their metallic forms cutting through the sky, red sensors scanning relentlessly. The bounty hunters weren't far behind. Jack tightened his grip on Karen's hand. "They found us. Time to run." Karen didn't need a translator to understand. Together, they sprinted through the jungle, dodging low-hanging vines and jumping over gnarled roots. The hum of the drones grew louder, their searchlights piercing the foliage. Each beam seemed to get closer, and Jack's heart pounded in his chest. "We're sitting ducks out here," he muttered. "We need a plan." Karen suddenly veered to the right, pulling Jack along. She pointed ahead, where a cluster of thick, bioluminescent plants grew. The plants' large, glowing leaves pulsed gently, almost in rhythm with Karen's necklace. She gestured for Jack to follow her lead. "You better know what you're doing," Jack said, diving into the undergrowth beside her. The glowing plants reacted instantly, their leaves curling around them like a protective cocoon. The light dimmed, leaving only faint slivers of visibility. Jack held his breath as the sound of the drones grew deafening. Red beams swept over the plants, but the foliage seemed to confuse the drone's sensors. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually evade detection. Then a loud mechanical voice shattered the quiet. "Tar GT Lockheed." Jack's blood ran cold. The drones opened fire, their energy blasts tearing through the plants. The makeshift cover disintegrated, and Jack pulled Karen to her feet. "Time for Plan B," he shouted, taking off again. They broke into a clearing, and Jack spotted something in the distance, a rusted speeder bike, half buried in the jungle floor. It looked ancient and barely functional, but it was their only chance. "Come on," he yelled, dragging Karen toward it. The bike was in worse shape up close. Vines had wrapped around its frame, and the control panel was caked with dirt. Jack dropped to his knees and frantically began pulling it free. "Please, please work," he muttered, flipping switches and rerouting power. The bike sputtered and coughed, but the engine refused to turn over. Karen knelt beside him, her glowing necklace pulsing faster. She touched the bike's control panel, and to Jack's amazement, the necklace emitted a burst of light that seemed to flow into the machine. The engine roared to life. "Okay, that's officially the coolest thing you've done so far," Jack said, hopping onto the bike. He held out his hand. "Get on." Karen climbed onto the back just as the drones broke into the clearing. They opened fire, but Jack twisted the throttle, and the bike shot forward, narrowly avoiding the blasts. The jungle blurred around them as they sped through the dense terrain. "Hold on tight," Jack shouted, weaving between trees. Karen wrapped her arms around his waist, her grip surprisingly strong. The drones gave chase, their engines whining as they dodged obstacles with machine precision. Jack pushed the bike harder, but it wasn't built for high speeds. The rusted frame rattled, and the engine sputtered like it was ready to give out. "Come on, you piece of junk," Jack growled, leaning forward. Just a little further. Ahead, the jungle opened up into a massive canyon. A rickety bridge spanned the gap, swaying in the wind. Jack's stomach flipped. The bridge didn't look sturdy enough to hold their weight, let alone at this speed. "You're not gonna like this," he said over his shoulder. Karen looked ahead, her eyes widening as she realized his plan. The drones closed in, their weapons charging. Jack grit his teeth and gunned the throttle. The bike hit the bridge with a jarring jolt, the wooden planks creaking ominously. The bridge swayed violently under their weight, but Jack didn't slow down. "Don't look down," he yelled, his knuckles white on the handlebars. The drones reached the edge of the canyon and hesitated, their programming seemingly struggling to decide if the pursuit was worth the risk. Jack spared a glance back and saw them retreating slightly, but not for long. Just as they reached the other side, the bike's rear wheel caught on a loose plank. The sudden jerk sent Jack and Karen tumbling off, landing in a heap on solid ground. The bike slid back onto the bridge, teetered for a moment, and then plummeted into the abyss. Jack groaned, pushing himself up. Well, that's one way to burn through fuel. Karen stood shakily, her glowing necklace now dim. She looked at Jack and then back at the bridge, where the drones hovered hesitantly on the other side. "For now, we're safe," Jack said, brushing himself off. "But they'll find another way across. We need to keep moving." Karen nodded, her resolve clear. She pointed to Jack's wrist scanner, then to the horizon, where the faint outline of mountains rose in the distance. Their destination was still far away, but the coordinates were leading them closer. Jack sighed. "Let's hope whatever's waiting for us up there is worth all this trouble." As they disappeared into the jungle, the hum of the drones faded, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were only just beginning. Somewhere, in the shadows of the galaxy, their enemies were closing in. The Rebel Alliance. The sun dipped below the horizon as Jack and Karen emerged from the dense jungle, their bodies exhausted and their nerves frayed. Ahead, the landscape transformed into jagged cliffs and rocky plateaus, the ground peppered with strange, luminescent crystals that glowed faintly in the twilight. It was beautiful, but Jack's mind was too focused on survival to appreciate it. Karen stopped suddenly, her glowing eyes scanning the area. She raised a hand, motioning for silence. Jack froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. "What now?" he whispered, following her gaze. A flicker of movement caught his eye, shadows darting between the rocks. Before Jack could react, figures emerged from the darkness, weapons trained on them. There were at least a dozen, their appearances as varied as the stars. Some were humanoid, others distinctly alien, their armor pieced together from scavenged parts. Their leader, a tall woman with emerald green skin and piercing yellow eyes, stepped forward. "Drop your weapons," she commanded, her voice sharp and authoritative. "And don't try anything stupid." Jack raised his hand slowly, glancing at Karen. She didn't seem alarmed. In fact, she stepped forward, holding up her glowing necklace as if it were some kind of offering. The green-skinned leader's eyes widened in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," the leader said, lowering her weapon. The rumors were true. The lost princess of Illyria. "Princess," Jack blurted out, looking at Karen. She avoided his gaze, her cheeks flushing a faint silver. "Your royalty. You didn't think to mention that." The leader gestured for her team to stand down. "Follow us. You'll be safe here, at least for now." Jack hesitated, his instincts screaming not to trust strangers with guns. But Karen stepped forward without hesitation, so he sighed and followed. "Yeah, sure, why not? What's one more dangerous gamble?" The group led them to a hidden base carved into the side of a cliff. Inside, the air buzzed with activity. Engineers worked on patching up damaged ships, medics tended to wounded fighters, and strategists argued over holographic maps. It was a makeshift operation, but it had the unmistakable energy of rebellion. The green-skinned leader introduced herself as Commander Riza. She guided Jack and Karen into a war room where a massive map of the galaxy was projected in the air. Riza gestured to a red-marked section. "That," she said, "is the sector controlled by the Dominion, a corrupt galactic corporation that's been bleeding this galaxy dry for decades. And now, they're after you." Jack crossed his arms. "Why? What's so special about her necklace and that crystal?" Riza gave him a sharp look. "You really don't know. That crystal is a key, a map to the lost fleet of the Illyrian Empire. The Dominion has been searching for it for years. If they get their hands on it, they'll use the fleet's power to crush any resistance." Karen stepped forward, speaking in her melodic language. Riza nodded as if she understood. "She says the fleet is hidden on her homeworld." Riza translated. "But the Dominion has already mobilized their forces. If we don't stop them, they'll destroy the planet to get what they want." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "Great, so we're outnumbered, outgunned, and racing against the clock. Sounds like my kind of day." Riza smirked. "You're not alone in this. We've been fighting the Dominion for years. We can help you." "Help us how?" Jack asked, skeptical. Riza's grin widened. "With this." She pressed a button on the table, and a hologram of a massive starship appeared. It was heavily armed, bristling with cannons and shields. "The Vindication. Our flagship. She's not pretty, but she's fast, and she packs a punch. We'll use her to punch a hole through the Dominion's blockade." Jack whistled. "Now that's a ship. But what happens once we're through?" Riza's expression darkened. "That's up to you, and the princess. You'll need to activate the fleet before the Dominion can take it. We'll buy you as much time as we can." Jack glanced at Karen. Her face was set with determination, but he could see the weight of the responsibility in her eyes. "You're sure about this?" he asked her. Karen nodded, placing a hand on his arm. Her expression said everything she couldn't put into words. She trusted him. "All right," Jack said, turning back to Riza. "Let's do this." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Karen worked with the engineers to calibrate the crystal artifact, ensuring it would guide them to the fleet. Jack familiarized himself with the Vindication systems, his scavenger instincts kicking in as he helped fine-tune the ship's engines. As they prepared to launch, Riza pulled Jack aside. "One more thing," she said, handing him a small device. "This is a beacon. If things go south, activate it. We'll do everything we can to get you out." Jack nodded, pocketing the beacon. "Thanks. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." As the Vindication lifted off, Jack stood beside Karen on the bridge. The ship's engines roared, and the stars stretched into lines as they entered hyperspace. Jack couldn't help but glance at Karen. She was calm, her glowing eyes fixed on the galaxy ahead. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "if we survive this, I'm going to need a long vacation." Karen gave him a small, knowing smile. For the first time in days, Jack felt a flicker of hope. But that hope was short-lived. As the Vindication exited hyperspace, the Dominion's blockade came into view, a wall of warships, their cannons already charging. "Battle stations," Riza shouted. Jack tightened his grip on the controls. "Here we go," he muttered. The war for the galaxy had begun. The final stand. The Vindication shuddered violently as Dominion warships opened fire, their energy blasts ripping through space. The bridge was alive with chaos. Alarms blaring, officers shouting orders, and the hum of overloaded power systems. Jack gripped the edge of a console, his knuckles white, as he tried to steady himself. "Shields at 60%. An officer shouted. "Divert power to the forward deflectors." Commander Riza barked. She turned to Jack and Karen, her yellow eyes fierce. "We'll hold the line as long as we can. You two need to get to the hangar. Your transport is ready." Jack nodded, but his stomach churned. The plan was simple enough on paper. Use the Vindication to create a distraction, punch through the blockade, and get Karen to the surface of her homeworld to activate the Illyrian fleet. Simple, but suicidal. "Let's move," he said to Karen, grabbing her hand. As they ran through the corridors of the Vindication, the ship shook with every hit. Karen's glowing necklace pulsed faster, as if responding to the tension. Jack glanced at her and saw the worry etched on her face. "You holding up?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Karen nodded but didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her resolve was clear, but so was her fear. They reached the hangar just as a massive explosion rocked the ship. A Dominion fighter had broken through, crashing into the bay. Flames and debris scattered everywhere, and the hangar crew scrambled to contain the damage. Jack shielded Karen as a piece of metal flew past them. "So much for an easy takeoff," he muttered. Their transport was a small, sleek shuttle designed for speed rather than combat. Jack sprinted toward it, pulling Karen along. The Dominion fighters outside the ship loomed larger with every second. "Jack." "Karen." Riza's voice crackled over the comm. "We're sending escorts with you. Get to the surface, no matter what. The fleet depends on you." Jack climbed into the cockpit and powered up the shuttle systems. The controls felt unfamiliar but intuitive enough. Karen strapped herself into the seat beside him, her hands clutching the glowing crystal artifact. "Here we go," Jack said, gripping the controls. The shuttle lifted off, the hangar doors sliding open to reveal the chaos of the battlefield. The moment they were in open space, the Dominion warships turned their attention to the shuttle. Fighters swarmed toward them, their weapons blazing. "We've got company," Jack shouted, weaving through the onslaught. The shuttle's shields held, but only barely. "Karen, if you've got any magic tricks, now's the time." Karen pressed the crystal against her necklace, and a wave of light burst from it. The Dominion fighters faltered. Their targeting systems momentarily scrambled. Jack used the opening to dive toward the planet's surface. "That's what I'm talking about," he said, a grin tugging at his lips. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere, the sky glowing red from the intense heat of re-entry. Below, Karen's homeworld stretched out in breathtaking beauty. Vast oceans, shimmering plains, and towering spires of crystal that seemed to hum with energy. "Where to?" Jack asked, glancing at the scanner. Karen pointed to a massive crystalline structure in the distance. It looked like a palace, its spires reaching toward the sky. Jack angled the shuttle toward it, but his heart sank when he saw what awaited them. Dominion forces had already landed. The palace grounds were a war zone. Dominion troops swarmed the area, their armored figures clashing with a small group of Illyrian defenders. Jack landed the shuttle on the outskirts, where the fighting was thinnest. "Stay close," he told Karen as they exited the shuttle. The battle raged around them as they made their way toward the palace. Jack fired his blaster at the Dominion soldiers, his aim sharp from years of scavenger work. Karen stayed close, her glowing necklace guiding her steps. As they neared the palace doors, a hulking figure stepped into their path. The bounty hunter leader, a towering alien with dark, leathery skin and piercing red eyes. He held a massive energy blade, its edge crackling with power. "Well, well," the bounty hunter said, his voice a low growl. "You've led me right to the prize." Jack stepped in front of Karen, his blaster raised. "You want her? You'll have to go through me." The bounty hunter smirked. "Gladly." The fight was brutal. The bounty hunter's blade was faster than it looked, and Jack struggled to keep up. He dodged and weaved, firing shots whenever he could, but the hunter was relentless. Karen watched helplessly, her hands clutching the crystal. Just as the bounty hunter raised his blade for a killing blow, Karen stepped forward. The crystal in her hands flared with brilliant light, and the ground beneath them trembled. The bounty hunter staggered, momentarily blinded. "Now," Karen shouted, her voice ringing with authority. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired a final shot, striking the bounty hunter in the chest. The alien let out a roar before collapsing, his blade flickering out. Breathing heavily, Jack turned to Karen. "You could have done that earlier, you know." Karen gave him a small apologetic smile and gestured toward the palace doors. They had no time to waste. Inside the palace, the air buzzed with energy. Karen led Jack to a massive chamber where a pedestal stood at its center. Surrounding it were rows of dormant starships, their sleek designs unmistakably Illyrian. Karen placed the crystal on the pedestal and pressed her necklace against it. The room lit up as energy coursed through the walls. One by one, the ships came to life, their engines humming with power. Jack stared in awe. "You did it. The fleet is waking up." But their victory was short-lived. Outside, the Dominion forces regrouped, their weapons aimed at the palace. Karen turned to Jack, her eyes filled with determination. She spoke in her melodic language, and though Jack couldn't understand the words, he knew what she was saying. "Let's finish this," he said, gripping his blaster. The final battle had begun. The reward. The palace walls shook as Dominion forces unleashed a relentless barrage of firepower. Explosions rocked the chamber, and the hum of the newly awakened Illyrian fleet grew louder, echoing through the ancient halls. Jack crouched behind a column, his blaster drawn, as Karen worked frantically at the pedestal, her glowing necklace pulsing in sync with the fleet's activation. "Whatever you're doing," Jack yelled over the chaos, "do it faster." Karen didn't look up, her hands moving swiftly over the ancient controls. The crystalline pedestal glowed brighter, sending streams of light into the ships outside. One by one, the dormant vessels lifted off the ground, their engines roaring to life. The Dominion forces pushed harder, their armored troops storming the palace. Jack fired back, his shots precise, but they kept coming. His blaster overheated, and he cursed, ducking behind cover. "Karen, we're out of time." he shouted. Karen glanced at him, her expression resolute. She pressed her necklace against the pedestal one final time, and the entire room was bathed in a blinding white light. Jack shielded his eyes, but when the light faded, the ships were fully activated, hovering above the palace like a protective swarm. A booming voice filled the air, resonating from the fleet's central command ship. Illyrian forces, online, awaiting orders. Karen stepped forward, her posture regal and commanding. She spoke in her melodic language, her words flowing with authority and power. The fleet responded instantly, forming a tight formation and firing precise, coordinated blasts at the Dominion warships above. Jack's jaw dropped as the Illyrian fleet tore through the Dominion blockade. The tide of the battle shifted in seconds. The once overwhelming Dominion forces now scrambled to retreat, their ships falling one by one under the relentless assault. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack muttered, watching the spectacle. "She's really doing it." As the Dominion forces retreated, the palace grew quiet. The remaining troops fled, their morale shattered by the sight of the Illyrian fleet in action. Jack lowered his blaster, his hand still trembling from the fight. Karen turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with gratitude. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. For the first time since they had met, she smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made Jack's heart skip a beat. "You're welcome," Jack said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the emotion in his voice. "So, what now? Do I get a medal or something?" Karen laughed softly, a sound like chimes in the wind. She gestured for him to follow, leading him outside to where the fleet hovered above the palace. The air was filled with the hum of engines and the cheers of Illyrian defenders who had fought bravely alongside her. Riza's voice crackled over the comm in Jack's ear. "You two really pulled it off. The Dominion's in full retreat. You've given us a fighting chance." Jack smirked, "All in a day's work." "Don't get cocky," Riza shot back. "We've still got a galaxy to save. But for now, enjoy the victory." As the Illyrian fleet secured the skies, Karen led Jack to the command ship, a massive vessel that dwarfed even the largest Dominion warships. Its interior was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture, glowing softly with the energy of its ancient systems. A council of Illyrian elders greeted them, their expressions a mix of awe and reverence. Karen stepped forward, addressing the elders in her melodic language. Jack couldn't understand the words, but he could tell she was explaining everything that had happened: the crash, their journey, and the final battle. The elders listened intently, their glowing eyes fixed on her. When she finished, one of the elders turned to Jack and spoke in accented but clear English. "You have done more for our people than we could ever repay. You saved our princess and helped restore the fleet." Jack shrugged, feeling suddenly awkward under their gaze. "I just did what needed to be done." The elder smiled. "And yet, you did it with bravery and honor. For that, we are eternally grateful." Later, as the fleet began its journey to liberate other parts of the galaxy, Jack and Karen stood on the observation deck of the command ship. The vast expanse of stars stretched out before them, and the glow of the fleet's engines cast a soft light over the room. Jack leaned against the railing, his usual cocky grin replaced by a rare moment of quiet reflection. "So, Princess, guess that makes me your loyal subject." Karen laughed, shaking her head. She reached out and placed her hand over his, her touch warm despite her silvery skin. She spoke softly, her melodic voice filled with gratitude and something deeper, something Jack couldn't quite put into words. "I still don't understand half of what you're saying," he said, "but I think I get the gist." Karen's smile grew, and she gestured to the stars. Her glowing eyes were filled with a sense of purpose, but also with a question. She was asking him to stay, to continue this journey with her. Jack didn't need to think twice. "Yeah," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "I'm in. Someone's got to make sure you don't blow yourself up again." Karen laughed, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt at peace. The galaxy was still dangerous, and the fight against the Dominion was far from over. But with Karen by his side, he knew they could handle anything. As the command ship soared through the stars, Jack tightened his grip on the railing, his gaze fixed on the endless possibilities ahead. His life as a scavenger was over. He was part of something bigger now, something worth fighting for, and maybe, just maybe, something worth falling for.